Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Renua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donohoe here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. This new year marks the opening of an election season, not only at the IFA, but also the general election expected in the early spring. Renua is the first party to present its manifesto to the voters this week, and they had a number of proposals aimed directly at farmers. My colleague Odile Evans met two of Renua's candidates.
John Lahey, Offaly, North Tipperary constituency.
Jason Fitzgerald, Cork North West constituency.
Okay, so what would you say are the main points for your agricultural commitments in the manifesto?
The biggest issue would be income volatility. It's been dodged for decades now, and especially with the abolition of the milk quotas, we said the pig industry, the poultry industry, there's huge fluctuations in income that this income averaging just isn't even coming close to dealing with. So we're proposing a volatility fund where farmers in years where they're making income and they have surplus income, they can put it into this fund on years when maybe things aren't as good and prices are lower, and pay tax on its exclusion from this fund.
You take Renua as a whole, it's about rewarding work. And we see the agriculture sector as trying to reward agriculture, and many political party has tried to take this on, but nobody has come up with a solution. So we're putting up real concrete solutions here that if a farmer has a product, that he should be paid for his product. There should be some sort of minimum price there that he knows that when he produces that product at the end of the month he gets a return for that. And I think that's all anyone expects, no matter what industry you're in, that if you work you get a return on it.
And just on the 23% flat rate tax, I mean, how do you propose to protect farmers with that?
Well, it's hugely beneficial, because if you look at if you go through the calculator, actually, a person will say on a very low income, a family, they get huge benefits. They get extra, I don't know, something like 2,500 extra. Instead of paying tax, they actually get a contribution instead of paying tax on that low level of income. So it's actually really just want to take an income, go into the tax calculator and do it, and you'll see it's really the flat tax is really for people on low income, and especially farmers, where you have 40% of the people on incomes of 10,000 or less. So there's huge issues in agriculture. If you take the beet industry the way that was dismantled in 0506, even though Greencore were making a profit on the industry, we certainly support the reintroduction of that. Like, it was a major food, we'll say, fodder source. We'll say, I think independent experts are saying that the fodder crisis we had in 2012 would have been prevented if the sugar beet industry was still in the country. And
just on that, how would you propose to reintroduce the beet industry?
Well, I think Beet Ireland have good proposals to introduce, is all they're looking for an accelerated tax credit, which we could be formulated from the income volatility fund. It could be formulated directly through them, and we certainly would be supporting that. I've spoken several times on it, and you're talking about creating 5,000 jobs, indirect and indirect. You're talking about also the haulage industry, where in times when, say, the milk collection would be at a lower levels, it was always the case. And
then you also have a lot about land mobility, land leasing, share farming. What do you plan to do there?
Well, my experience when I was milking cow, or because I'm like a farmer, I'm still a dairy farmer, was a beef farmer. So we need to tie down farmers in long-term leases. We need to give support to farmers to invest in land. And the other thing we have is the bond scheme. It's to take farmers who will say, currently now, if you want to buy land, you have to have probably 40% of it. You also have to have capital to invest in the farm to get up and going. So what we're saying there is qualified farmers who have a track record, basically through long-term leasing or through the share farming partnership, that they would go in, they would be facilitated through a bond scheme to purchase land. They would pay for it over a period of time. They could obviously exit the scheme, and then they would qualify they'd have enough equity built up in the land to be able to go to a bank and or they could continue on and pay back for the land through the bond scheme.
Just in with regard to the two things there that you brought up there in terms of the flat tax and the farmer, when you do the calculations on it, straight away there's more disposable income for a low income earner, and the majority of farmers wouldn't be getting much of an income from a farm, depending on the size of the farm. So from that point of view, it lends more then for them to expand rather than staying stationary, which is the case with a lot of farmers there at the moment. And with the bond scheme there, that also gives it more access to more land to expand, and that's what you want to do. If you're a small, medium enterprise business in the private sector, you want to be able to expand, and you want to be able to hand it on down to the next generation, and that's what we're trying to do.
But yet, I mean, you argue that you need to maintain small farmers and the number of farmers farmers, but you want farmers to expand at the same time. Does that not clash?
No, you need anyone that wants to expand. There's opportunities there to expand. You're always going to have small, say, part-time farmers as such. The land was passed down to them. That has to be encouraged. You can't take that away from them. But you need a situation whereby you have a balance right across the spectrum, where if people want to expand, they should be able to expand.
There's one final thing I wanted to touch off. You had competition in meat processing. Politically, how does Renua propose to do anything about that?
Well, it's very clear it has to be done on a European level. If you take back in 1973, farmers retained, we say, 70% of the consumer price of a product. We're now at a stage where they're getting 25-30%, and no one knows where the rest is going. So, we need a regulatory authority that has the teeth on a European-wide basis to investigate where that money is going, and to basically publish the percentage that the consumers are getting, the retailers are getting and the processors are getting.
And I'm joined by our news correspondent, Pat O'Toole, to discuss general election in 2016. Pat, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Pat, Renua, one of the newer political parties, launched its pre-election manifesto this week. This effectively starts in earnest the pre-election campaigns, with an election most likely in February. What are the expectations for farmers and rural dwellers out there for this general election?
I think the mood is volatile. Rural Ireland wasn't as exercised around the big touchstone issue of the current government, which is water charges, but there were parallel issues around Phil Hogan's old stomping ground, the Department of the Environment, the septic tank charges, the property tax, and those are the things which dragged the government back, I suppose, even as the economy seemed to be stabilising. We're now in, I think it's generally agreed, economic recovery. There is a sense that agriculture has played a huge part in that. There's a certain amount of pride in that in rural Ireland, but at the same time we're not feeling the effects of what is a Dublin-based recovery. So people are going to be asking questions about when's the recovery going to hit rural Ireland, and very specifically asking that of the government parties. For Fianna Fáil, the question is, are they out of quarantine? Are they forgiven? They had a good local elections, but will that transpire and translate into a good general election? The opinion polls would say not. Of the newer parties, Renua are probably the one with the best footprint in rural Ireland. They're right of centre party, both in terms of their social policy and their economic policy. They're proposing a fairly radical 23% flat rate tax with a significant threshold for low earners. The idea is to get higher earners to pay significantly more than they do by the removal of tax thresholds and pension thresholds. It's a very risky strategy. Will the public go for it?
And Pat, I suppose it was Bill Clinton that said it's the economy stupid, but does it come down to general elections, and particularly in Ireland, social issues are more what the electorate get out and get behind a party that can do that rather than the economy?
Well, certainly for a younger generation, we saw a huge mobilisation of youth and of a working class and urban vote, where voting turnout is quite low in the referendum last year, which was a piece of social and social justice policy. I think Ireland is a more liberal country than a lot of people would have previously believed. We've shown that last year. There is a sense that Ireland is a more inclusive society, but the only big social issue on the agenda is abortion, and I can't see abortion becoming a red line issue during the campaign, but it may well be a huge issue in terms of the formation of the next government, because it certainly will be a policy plank for the Labour Party.
And speaking of formation of the next government, if you track the opinion polls over the past year, it's been fascinating, especially when you look at the don't knows. Don't knows have gone from 40% down to maybe 20%. Do people now know who they are going to vote for, and has that, as a result, translated in support for the government parties?
More people know, and yes, it has translated into hardening support for the government parties. Sinn Féin have had a very bad 6 months. They still have some time to recover, but not much. The rural vote is more stable than the urban vote. There's no doubt about that. And rural constituencies are more predictable than urban constituencies. The only thing predictable about urban constituencies is that they have consistently thrown the government out over the last 20 years. Will they do that again? If they do, will the support that it seems Fine Gael in particular will get in rural Ireland be enough to return them to power? It's too early to say.
So, looking into the crystal ball, are we looking at the current government coming back with the help of 10 to 15 independents, or is that even possible?
A government majority requires 79 seats. The Dáil is going down from 166 to 158 seats, so the magic figure now is 79 plus 1. Most pundits would believe that on their very best day, Fine Gael, if they touched 60 seats, it would be a miracle. And That means that they're 20 seats shy. Labour on their best day, 15. But can Labour and Fine Gael have their best day on the same day? Probably not. So you're looking at them dipping into the same pool and probably falling 10 seats short of an overall majority. How will that be filled? Is anyone else capable of forming a stable government? Those are the questions. We're probably going to have to wait long after the polling day to find out.
Finally, Pat, election dates. Are we looking like the last week of February now?
It seems almost inevitable it'll be the last week in February. There is a desire to get a reasonably quick campaign, get it out of the way before the celebrations of the centenary of the foundation of the state. And we would expect that the campaign is effectively up and running now. You're going to have people knocking on your doors as soon as the waters subside.
Thanks, million, Pat. And for more on general election and Renua's pre-election manifesto, you can visit farmersjournal.ie or this week's Irish Farmers Journal.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Renua, the home of Irish dairy.
One of your New Year resolutions may well be to draw up a health plan for your herd. Let's listen in as our Cork-based contributor Tommy Moyles goes through the exercise with his vet.
This is Tommy Moyles in conversation with one of the vets from Faxbridge Veterinary Clinic, Clonakilty, giving a rundown on the annual herd health plan put in place for my own herd.
It's our fourth year of the herd health plan, and the advantages of it are being proactive in seeing any problems rather than being reactive, with the result that any diseases that have basically caused a problem, that we have dealt with them over the last 4 years, so that you can have a night's sleep and I can stay in bed too.
What minerals in particular were you looking for in the blood analysis?
Microelements are things like selenium, copper, but they forget about the major ones, which are calcium, phosphorus and magnesium. And calcium and phosphorus and magnesium are more important to your cow than all the other ones put together in one sense. Yeah. But they do contribute. Yeah. But you need to check calcium, phosphorus, and you can see by the magnesium being low here, it's the magnesium is the major one that you need to deal with. The other ones, if you're, people use copper if they have an issue on the farm, or they supplement with, you can buy boluses now that have copper, selenium, and cobalt and iodine and everything combined in one, whereas before they weren't.
Rumen fluke was an issue with the animals on the rented ground. Could you give a rundown on how to deal with this type of fluke?
Rumen fluke only becomes a problem in the small intestine when there are large numbers present. And if you actually checked the cows all during the year, you may come up with a certain amount of rumen fluke in their dungs. But if we are on very wet ground, we may need to introduce an extra treatment for it earlier in the year. The life cycle is 3 months, 90 days. So if the cows go out on the 1st of April, 1st of May is 30 days, 1st of June, 1st of July. So in actual fact, it's only what they're picking up in April and May are you killing when you dose them in July. If it's wet, April and May, you do need to do them. If it's dry, you could actually wait out till September. But it depends on whether your rumen fluke needs to be done or not at that time. It depends on the way the rest of the summer is.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Renua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
In this week's Irish Farmers Journal, we go through the HSA's annual report on fatal accidents at work. While the numbers showed an improvement in 2015, 18 people still lost their lives on Irish farms. At the end of last year, the Irish Farmers Journal and ESB Networks launched the Safe Family Farms campaign to help change the mentality that allows so many tragedies to take place. We received support from Kildare tillage farmer Michael O'Brien, who survived an accident 40 years ago, and told his story to our digital editor, Thomas Hubert.
Back in 1976, August 1976, I had a farm accident with a tractor and baler. Actually, to more define it, it would be with the PTO. And in this accident, I lost my right leg below the knee. And it was a horrific accident insofar as that I was out 2 fields away from anywhere, and when the accident happened, I thought that if I didn't make some moves, that I was going to bleed to death, because I did see that I was bleeding heavily, and I had no option but to get back up on the tractor and drive 2 fields down to a road, down to a main road, to raise the alarm. And lucky enough, when I did get down to the main road, there was I met actually a first cousin of mine who was coming in for his lunch, and he came over to me and he said to me, what's wrong? And I said, look at my leg. The bone was sticking out on my right leg. My foot was left in the boot down the field. And he brought me into his house and called the ambulance and called the doctor.
That's a very close shave, really. And you're now taking part in this campaign to tell other farmers that this could happen to them as well, because you were doing nothing extraordinary on that day.
Not really. I suppose maybe I was a bit complacent, and I suppose you could say there is an old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And what I did do that day was a mistake insofar as I went to get down to check the baler, and I left the tractor running and the baler running and the PTO running. And when I had checked the density of the bales in the baler, I was coming back along, and I noticed the draw pin had risen in the clevis hitch, and I just walked over and went to kick it down, and as I kicked the draw pin down, which is under the PTO, the universal joint caught the bottom of my trousers and pulled me in between the drawbar and the PTO, and it started to rise me up, and I caught hold of the back mudguard of the tractor, and I held on for dear life because I would have been pulled completely into the PTO. And with that, I was shot across the field about 7 or 8 feet. I really didn't know what was going on with this shot, but I was holding on. And when I went to get back up, I couldn't get back up. I could see the boot, and as about 3 or 4 feet away. And the more I looked at the boot, I could see my foot in it.
So, what can other farmers learn from your experience now that you've told this story?
Well, I didn't think this was going to happen to me, and I would think that most farmers or people working on farms feel that they're quite safe and that they know, that they're working within safety bounds and what have you. But it's not as simple as that. And I suppose, this happened back in 1976. In 1976, I was in a hurry to get this field baled, and people are still in the same hurry today. And I feel, that rushing and racing, that's one of the reasons, one of the factors that led to this farm accident. I must say that I was familiar with farm safety insofar as I had spent 2 years in agricultural college. I had spent 3 years on the farm apprenticeship scheme, and on the farm apprenticeship scheme, on their release courses, there was always safety emphasised on these courses. So it's not that I wasn't told, or it's not that I didn't know about farm accidents. I did know, but I thought this is not going to happen to me.
Michael, thank you very much, and fair play to you for telling this very powerful story. There's a video interview where you give the details of what happened to you, and viewers can see it at farmersjournal.tv. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The Irish Farmers Journal weekly podcast, brought to you by Renua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, let's take a look at greyhound racing. My colleague Mary Phelan met Sarah Kinsella, one of the few women to develop a career in the industry. Mary tells the consumer editor Ciara Leahy what she discovered when interviewing Sarah for this week's Irish Country Living.
I didn't really know much about it. I had a fabulous evening in Shelbourne Park just before Christmas with
That's
Sarah.
In Dublin.
Yeah, so Shelbourne Park is actually just off the Liffey, which I never realised. It's kind of between the Liffey nearly and the Aviva Stadium, but you'd never really know it's there. It wasn't very well signposted. But I drove in there, parked the car, and there was this whole hive of activity, this whole world of greyhound racing going on, and you wouldn't really realise it as you're driving down the quays that this is kind of just behind, some of the buildings there as you're driving by. So I met Sarah. She is in her mid to late 20s. She is a fabulous ambassador for the greyhound industry. You don't really meet many girls of this age who are as passionate about something like greyhound racing, but she really knows her stuff. She's from a farm in Rollstown in County Meath. And greyhounds have always been a big part of her life. If her granddad had a winner, he'd bring the dog to the local pub, give him a bag of crisps, put some Guinness in an ashtray. This, of course, was much to the amusement of the locals.
That's fantastic. I was laughing when I was reading that.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to her granddad. Her dad raised greyhounds as well. She says that the Ladbrokes 600 Derby in 2009 was the best day of her life. The grand prize was €35,000, and one of their most successful dogs over the years was Bray Breezer, which had over 100 winners between 9 9 pups of that particular bitch.
So she's been really involved since she was very young.
Yeah, so I mean, she's very passionate, but they also have quite significant successes behind them as well.
Now, to be honest, Mary, I actually met Sarah long before this article came out, because
you did, Ciara.
She gave me very good tips at a Farmers Journal staff party in Shelburne Park. I was a big winner that night because she is an unbelievable tipster. Tell us more.
She is excellent. So she works as a tipster in Shelburne Park. She does corporate events. So when I was there before Christmas, there was a lot of corporate events going on. You kind of had the hardcore, proper Greyhound people on the ground floor, and they were, putting on their bets. But then upstairs, you had companies having their Christmas parties or wooing clients,
and there people that probably don't have a clue,
who don't have a clue. And Sarah comes in and she picks dogs for people who are new to Greyhound racing, and she picked dogs for me on the last race. On the night that I met her, and I won a nice little sum of cash as well. The guy came around and was peeling off notes from his wad of cash for me. So she is excellent, but I personally think she could make a huge amount of money from just betting on greyhounds if she wanted to, but she doesn't do it for the money. She says she's actually a sentimental gambler herself, so she'll put on money every Saturday night when she goes to Shelburne Park, but she's a sentimental gambler, and what she'll do is she might put money on a dog that once won a lot of money for her but hasn't won in a while, but she kind of feels affectionately towards that dog because he once won her money. So really, really interesting. So really, she is just an absolute hive of knowledge about greyhound racing, and just a really fascinating character to interview.
But I suppose as well, I found it was a lot of fun in the sense that she had the knowledge, but she would say, this dog might do well, or this dog might do well. So you still had that excitement. It's never a guarantee.
Never a guarantee.
Mary, it's an industry that is often mired in controversy.
Yeah, it certainly is. Look, there's no doubt that it has a relatively bad reputation, particularly in the wake of a recession when many owners couldn't afford to keep their dogs anymore. You had syndicates from construction in particular who were buying greyhounds, and then the money got tight. So I kind of put this to Sarah, but of course she's very, very quick to defend the industry, and she says that 2 to 3% of the proceeds from every race goes to a fund for rehoming greyhounds. And she was keen to stress, and many in the industry are, that greyhounds do make very, very good pets. They're very docile, they're very affectionate. So, if you are thinking of getting a pet or a dog this year, maybe consider getting a greyhound. And it helps, in an industry where, in the wake of a recession, there's more greyhounds around than there might otherwise be.
Excellent. So if you're in the greyhound industry, or you're thinking a night out of the dogs might be fun for 2016, then Mary's article about Sarah Kinsella is well worth a read in this week's Irish Country Living.
Yes, and can I just say I would highly, highly recommend an evening in Shelburne Park if you're looking for something different to do for a night out or a social occasion. It's very, very enjoyable, and the food in the restaurant
across
is gorgeous.
the country, because they are Cork, and
yes,
you have them in Dundalk, so they're across the country.
A night of the dogs, great crack.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app, and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Renua, the home of Irish dairy.